Good morning,
Good
Marcy.
morning.
Our quote for the month is based on the spiritual principle of diversity and the spiritual practice of inclusion. Abdul el-Baha, the head of Baha Faith, wrote, "In reality, all are members of one human family, children of one heavenly Father. Humanity may be likened unto the varied colored flowers of one garden. There is unity in diversity. Each sets off and enhances the other's beauty." And our topic for today is immortality. Everybody's doing it. Dr. Ernest Holmes, okay? Dr. Ernest Holmes wrote, "We believe in the eternality and immortality and the continuity of the individual soul, forever and ever expanding." From the screen, let us affirm this truth together with conviction. I know we are all rooted in the one life which produces limitless diversity. Each person, plant, animal is a unique divine being. I therefore see all my brothers and sisters worldwide through the eyes of love. I practice loving inclusion. And so it is.
So it is.
A man was driving along the highway one day when all of a sudden the Easter rabbit jumped in front of his car, and he tried to swerve, but he accidentally hit the bunny. And so the basket and all of its contents, the eggs and candy, were flying all over the place. And he was heartbroken. He was an animal lover. And so he got out of his car to see what had happened. And sure enough, the bunny appeared lifeless. And so he began to cry. And suddenly, a woman drove up in a car and stopped to see what she could do to help. And she said, "What happened?" And he said, "I feel so terrible. I hit the Easter bunny, and now all of the children are going to be so disappointed." And so she said, "Well, I have a solution." So she reached in her pocketbook, pulled out a can of spray, and sprayed it all over the bunny's fur. The bunny hopped up, came to life miraculously, and hopped down the road for 50 yards, turned around and waved, hopped another 50 yards, turned around and waved, hopped another 50 yards, turned around and waved. And this continued on until you could no longer see him. He'd gone off over the horizon. And the man was astonished, and he said, "What happened? I don't understand. This was amazing. What's on the label of that can?" And so she held it up so he could read it, and it said, "Hairspray." Restores life to hair. Adds permanent wave. Oh, I wanted to get you in the spirit of laughter here because we're going to be talking about immortality. And you know, there is so much fear. In fact, that of the 10 most common fears that there are on the planet, the fear of death is the second most common. And the first one is, guess what?
Public speaking?
No, actually loneliness.
Ah.
Loneliness, the fear of being abandoned, off by yourself and alone. So anyway, this thing called death, that the humans call death. We want to deal with that, and deal with it with a sense of high perspective and illumination, because it is something that haunts us until we finally come to a greater realization of what life is all about. And so as we contemplate that, I want to introduce again that beautiful quote by Ernest Holmes that talks about not only the immortality of life, that we are not just beings who die and then become immortal. We already are immortal. We are immortal beings. We are eternal, immortal. We are of the one source, the one presence, the one life, and the one power, which is God. So that's one piece of it. And the other piece of it, he says, and our souls are ever and ever expanding. So our nature, the urge that is within us, is an urge to grow, to expand, and to unfold in consciousness, in God consciousness, in love, in peace, in joy, in wisdom. So the two principles then that really help to remove that sting of death are the principle of immortality, knowing this higher truth, and coupled with the principle of conscious evolution, that urge to grow. So what does this all have to do with diversity inclusion? Were you wondering that? I know I was at first, and I thought, well, how does this tie in? And here's the way it ties in for me, is that we are on an eternal journey together. Do you get it? Eternal. We are eternally together in one way or another with the rest of humanity. And so why not make the journey as wonderful and rich and fulfilling as possible by simply opening our hearts, seeing the perfection and the beauty of diversity? I mean, the entire creation itself is made up of all kinds of uniqueness. Even every grain of sand is unique. All the flowers are unique. We are all unique. And so we want to give up the idea of thinking we have to just hang out with people who are just like us, because the truth is there's nobody that's just like us. So we may as well enjoy the diversity. As far as this beautiful principle of immortality goes, I think there's a beautiful analogy that I would like to share that is from James Van Prague's book, Adventures of the Soul. Anybody ever read that book? Yeah. He invites us to look at the cycle of life, our own cycle of life, as very similar to a scuba diver. So I love this, a scuba diver. So he said, the diver doesn't spend his entire time underwater fretting about his oxygen running out. So he says the dive underwater is like our dive onto planet Earth. So he says that the diver doesn't spend the whole time wondering when his oxygen will run out. He knows that it will happen sooner or later, so he just enjoys marveling at the sights below the surface. Sounds to me like present moment awareness.
Yes.
He may be having a great time, but when the clock goes off, it's time for him to go to the surface. It certainly doesn't mean that he can't go back down again. It's just part of the experience. When the diver surfaces, he may slap on a new tank and dive back in, or it says he may decide to sit on the boat and contemplate his last journey. Throughout history, humans have looked upon death as something to fear. It's the fear of the unknown. God, in infinite wisdom, has awakened our awareness to the cycle of life while we're in the depths of the ocean with a finite amount of oxygen. And we don't know what will happen when the tank runs out, although we get a lot of hints, don't we? I know by reading books like Near-Death Experience and a lot of the others that are on the afterlife, I think many of us have been given some hints or some ideas of what it might be like. But ultimately, we don't know until we actually experience it. So he says, we don't know that above the surface is our real home. And I think I might disagree with him, because I think our real home is here and now wherever we are. That's my personal opinion. We'll dive with many friends, and when the tank runs out, they'll have to go to the top. We'll miss them, of course, but when our time is up, we'll see them topside. The last thing our friends would want for us is to spend the rest of our lives mourning their absence. Right? So that's why it's so important to to see this from a higher perspective, this thing called immortality, this thing called the cycle of life. So the Easter story, the story of Jesus' resurrection, of his message to all of humanity of our immortal nature. It wasn't just about him being immortal, was it? He was giving us the message that these things that I do and even greater things that you do. He reminded us the kingdom of heaven is within, not out there somewhere after you leave the body. The kingdom of heaven is here. We carry that with us wherever we go. The kingdom of heaven is within. And that ye are ye are God's children of the Most High is another thing he reminded us. So again, we don't die to become immortal. We are immortal already. We are immortal already. Paul wrote, there are celestial bodies and there are bodies terrestrial. Our bodies are wonderful, marvelous things, aren't they? The temples of the living Spirit that we are in truth. And yet we are not our bodies. Our bodies are simply an outpicturing, and I like to call it an earth suit while we're here on planet Earth. But it's a reminder that just as there is our bodies for us on this earth plane, there are celestial bodies. Ernest Holmes says there's a body within a body within a body for each level of evolution that takes place on our eternal journey. So, but the point is that we are pure spirit, having a human experience, a human incarnation. So let us give up the fear of death and embrace our immortality. For when we live in the present moment, knowing our immortal nature, knowing that we are in this for the long haul, we can show up in a more loving, radiant, and joyful way. We can just enjoy every single moment for what it has. Live life fully with zest and wonder and awe. Sounds good, doesn't it? Mm-hmm. It's a choice. It's a choice in each and every moment. The Easter story is also a story about ascendance, about becoming greater and greater and greater versions of ourselves. It's an eternal progression in consciousness. So we are immortal and we have the urge to evolve. And since we have freedom of choice, we can either participate in our evolutionary process, participate in creation, or we can resist it. And when we resist that evolutionary urge, that's when we bump into all kinds of challenges and difficulties. So the next aspect that I'd like to talk about is this idea of crucifixion. And you know, all of the stories of the Bible and all sacred texts give us, it's in code, I'd like to call it in code, metaphysical principles that inform us on how to move through our journey, our spiritual journey with ease and with grace. And so this message of crucifixion, which is, I always want to avoid it. The thought of it really creeps me out. I'm just going to tell you the truth. But, when we look at it metaphysically, I was reminded of Dr. Tracy Brown's quote from Stained Glass Spirit. She said, ignoring the beauty and the value and uniqueness of different types of people is equivalent to ignoring God and refusing to see all the ways God shows up as humanity. I'm going to read that again. It's so powerful. Ignoring the beauty and value and uniqueness of different types of people is equivalent to ignoring God and refusing to see all the ways God shows up as humanity. Let's breathe that in. It's a wonderful thing to reflect upon. So when we came into this body, we brought our uniqueness, our unique whole, complete, perfect selves with us, that spirit essence of who we are. Over time, just because the way things are on this plane, there's the fear vibration. There's the love vibration too, but there's the fear vibration. And if we weren't able to maintain our love, our awareness of ourselves, which small children really take a lot of cues from everybody around them. And even if there's a wonderful, loving home, there's still the media and peers and other other experiences that they have along the way, that we all have along the way. So what happens with the fear vibration is there tends to be a fear of being different because then we might be cast out or rejected. And along with that then comes a minimizing of our own uniqueness, suppressing it, putting it down, keeping a low profile so that we can fit in. To me, that's crucifixion. That's an analogy of crucifixion. We are, in a sense, or we are feeling like this human experience is crucifying the true nature of who we are. And if we're not careful, we can stay in that place of victimization. And this month is really all about breaking out of that and embracing our divine uniqueness and embracing the divine uniqueness of everyone else and encouraging ourselves to be who we are in truth and encouraging everyone else to be who they are in truth. And I love that idea. So it's time then to rise above crucifixion. And the beautiful thing is even with all of the beliefs of not enough, and all of the experiences that we have happened to us, discrimination, prejudice, bias, judgment, all of those things are simply a temporary covering, a shell to be let go of, to allow the emergence of our true self. And the beautiful thing is, because the true nature is never harmed or hurt, cannot be extinguished, that true self is ever calling us to return to its true nature. That's that Spirit's calling you. There's a song by Ricky Byers that goes, Spirit's calling you, come, come. Spirit's calling you, come, come. And so there is that spirit essence, that still small voice within us that's calling us to return home to our true natures. And that's where forgiveness comes in. Forgiveness is the portal. I like the idea of portal to living more fully and freely as who we are in truth. So think about it. The pattern of life is, it appears on this human plane as death and rebirth, that cycle of life. Spring is and actually the seasons of the year is a great outpicturing of that. In terms of ourselves, that death and rebirth is the death of the ideas of who we think we are that are not the truth. It's the death of the sense of the false self, the limited self, the self that doesn't fit in. All of those things have to die, have to go in order for the birth of our true selves to come into full fruition. So we're talking about rising in the consciousness of our true nature, rising in God, rising in love, moving from fear to love, moving from separation consciousness to oneness consciousness. And resurrection, this rising in love, follows forgiveness, the consciousness of forgiveness. When Jesus was on the cross, he invoked the consciousness of forgiveness when he said, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. So think about someone you've had a hard time forgiving. Think about it for a moment. Are you thinking they knew exactly what they were doing and I will try to forgive them because it's the right thing to do, but they still knew what they were doing? Anybody have that thought? So here's a higher perspective. Our critics, our seeming enemies, are truly our healing angels in disguise. We learned this in the radical forgiveness class, right?
Yep.
Those who appear to be our enemies, our biggest challenges, are our healing angels in disguise. And here's the thing, I love this higher perspective. They are pushing us to do something that we might not do otherwise. Because there's a tendency just to do the status quo. Just move through our day, same old, same old. But when we bump into a really big challenge, what happens? I know what happens with me is I get more vigorous with my spiritual practices. I fill out my radical forgiveness worksheets. I do my inner work. So we pray, we join a spiritual community, we meditate, we read metaphysical and sacred books, we take classes, we do all of the things that we know help to connect us with our inner divine self, our true self, to connect us with God. Because we know that's where the answer is, don't we? There's something within us that knows even if our human mind resists that idea. So our healing angels, those challenging people, then, will motivate us to do what we don't really necessarily want to do. We'd rather just bliss out doing something else. Or and they also support us in being disciplined about something that we wouldn't ordinarily be disciplined about. So think about it this way then. When we forgive them for what they didn't really know what they were doing, we secretly know that they were really supporting our resurrection. They were supporting us in rising in consciousness and becoming greater versions of ourselves. Isn't that cool? You don't believe me, do you? I didn't see a lot of enthusiasm there. Well, I just say if you haven't done it, if you haven't done the forgiveness work, and there's some beautiful free forgiveness, radical forgiveness worksheets online that you can use, and if anybody would like some support and help with that, you can see some of the people who've taken the radical forgiveness class. I'm volunteering you, who's taken radical forgiveness so far? Okay, look around. There's a lot of people who know how to do these worksheets. Forgiveness is the portal from that sense of victimization into a greater sense of freedom. Tomb time. I want to talk about tomb, T-O-M-B, time. That symbol of the time when Jesus was in the tomb before the resurrection. Our own tomb time is the time that it takes for when we're planting our new seeds in consciousness, our prayers, our meditation, all that we're doing to shift and change ourselves, our forgiveness work. There's a period of time in which it takes seeds to grow, right? And here's the interesting thing about tomb time, and this is why we can have an experience of something called the dark night of the soul or challenging situations, and it's because of the principle of chemicalization. And chemicalization goes like this. As we plant in the new seeds, the old thought forms start disintegrating. A lot of emotion can come up. All of our structures that were supported, and structures really that we don't want, all the structures that were supported by the old consciousness break down as well. We may lose a job. We may, some relationships may go away that were there before. Here's the thing, though. It's important to maintain a higher perspective, because what happens then is we are preparing ourselves for a freer, fuller, more expanded life and for more of the good that we've been praying about. And so we let go of the old structures. We allow ourselves to feel the feelings, and we continue to do our spiritual practice. And that means also receive spiritual support if you need it. We have people here trained to be spiritual practitioners. Raise your hands, you guys. Our spiritual practitioners. We have several of them in the room right now. That includes me as well. This is not the time to go it alone. This is the time to be in community, to receive support. Tomb time. Okay. So, as everything begins to come to fruition, there is a resurrection, a lifting in consciousness, a rising in the vibration of God's love. Again, love is something we choose. We choose it by doing our inner work, by choosing love in each and every moment. And so as we step from the tomb of darkness, of our old patterns, into the light of our divine selves, we bring all of the gifts of who we are, that light, that love, all of our uniqueness, all of those wonderful, wonderful blessings that we have for the planet into forward and into fruition. I see some smiles taking place right now because you know what I'm talking about, right? So immortality then. Everybody's doing it. We're all doing it. We're all part of the immortality dance, let's face it. That's the way we're created. Diversity. Everybody's doing it. We're all unique, every one of us. Everybody's doing it. And inclusion. This is where the choice comes in. Inclusion is an action of love that we consciously take to include others. It comes more naturally when we hang out in the vibration of love, when we remember our oneness with God, when we allow ourselves to see each other as God sees us. So I just celebrate this beautiful season of rebirth, of oneness, of joy, of celebrating the earth, of the time of the Passover, of the beautiful message of Easter. And I just invite all of you to join me in just truly implementing it in our lives, putting it into practice. And so with this, we raise our arms in joy by saying, yes, and so it is. And I want to say namaste, ubuntu, and ashe.